Hey, and welcome to futurethinkers.org, a podcast about the evolution of technology, society, and consciousness. I'm Mike Gilliland.
And I'm Yuvia Ivanova. If you're new to the show and you want to get a list of our favorite books, popular episodes, and to join our community, go to futurethinkers.org/start. Hey, and welcome back to the show. Our guest in the following two episodes is Nora Bateson, an award-winning filmmaker, writer, educator, and the president of the International Bateson Institute. Nora comes from a family lineage of complexity thinkers. Her father was the systems theorist Gregory Bateson, and her grandfather was the biologist William Bateson, who coined the term genetics.
Nora's book, Small Arcs of Larger Circles, came out in 2016, and she is currently working on her next book about warm data, or the interrelational process between and among systems. In this first part of the interview, we talk about how to make better sense of the issue of climate and ecology on our planet. You can get all the links and show notes from this episode at futurethinkers.org/106. Part 2 of the interview will be available at the same place once it goes live in about a week.
All right, let's get into it.
Get our 50-page guide on adapting to the future. Sign up at futurethinkers.org/signup.
Upgrade your mental operating system, increase your personal sovereignty, and gain deeper self-knowledge with our courses in personal evolution. Register now at courses.futurethinkers.org. To stay up to date with new episodes, subscribe to Future Thinkers on your favorite platform. And leave us a review or a like. It really helps out the show. And don't forget to share this episode on social media.
I think an interesting place to start would be for you to maybe provide some of your perspective on the ecological problems we're facing in the world, and maybe we can start to peel back the layers of what people can do about it, and what people are trying to do currently, but maybe how it's not so effective.
Yeah, because that seems to be just in all of our faces right now in the media.
Yeah, and it also leads into a lot of other kind of topics that we can dive into, what to do.
Yeah.
Okay. So, first of all, I want to start by saying that I've been around this for a very long time. So when I was a little kid, I was at dinner tables with people who were trying to, really address all the same issues we have today, only it was 1974. And so I guess there's a part of me that is, on the one hand, very deeply marinated in this kind of care. When I was a kid growing up, we had really two rules in the house. And one was that if you ever turn over a stone to see who's living underneath it, what creepy crawlies and critters are under there, you should always put it back. And the other was, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And those were really the two rules of the house. And inside those rules, there is a whole meta realm of ways of paying attention and caring. So it's an interesting thing to think about how the rules we make create a meta. And then we live in the meta. And then the impulses, the inclinations, the ideas, the moments of choosing an action or the logic, the rationale of what it is that gets kind of put into place, that comes out of the meta. It doesn't really come out of the rules. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, this is a moment. This is a couple of days after Greta Thunberg has just given the big UN address and said, "How dare you?" to the assembly, and I've just this week been with a group of activists working for NGOs trying to help with climate issues, and I have to really reside in both the deep appreciation and respect I have for this work and also the frustration and disappointment. And sometimes even just irritation. I just get irritated with it. And I get irritated because in my own work and in that meta that I introduced you to in the beginning, there's something very importantly transcontextual. Okay. And this is a word that I got from my dad's work. And it's a word that I am using more and more in places where I might have said transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary or intersectional or, those types of descriptions. But I really like this notion of transcontextual description because life doesn't exist in disciplines. Actually, life is happening in various contexts. And when these contexts overlap, it becomes really obvious that you can't make flat diagrams of them that make any sense. And you can't pick things apart and try to fix them when, in fact, you're working with a multi-contextual issue that is living and alive in multiple different ways. Okay, so let me give you an example of what I mean by transcontextual, and then we'll back into where this is going in terms of ecology and how we are addressing that right now. Okay, so I am transcontextual, right? I am a physical body. I have, 40 trillion or some unknown number of organisms that live in and on me. I am a filmmaker. I am an author. I'm a mom of many children, and I'm also a daughter. I live in Sweden and I have a Swedish passport, but I'm a California kid. I am my demographic and my culture. I carry that with me no matter what I try to say or do. So in each of those contexts that I just described, there is a Nora. And that's the same Nora, but in very, very different patterns of communication and interaction, right? The patterns of communication and interaction in my microbiome are really different than the ones with you, or the ones with you are very different than with my kids. It doesn't mean that I'm a different person, but there are many contexts that come together to bring me here into this moment. They reach back into my ancestry, and maybe you could even imagine that they're being pulled by my grandchildren that haven't come yet. I don't know. So now let's look at what that means in terms of ecology. Okay, it's very handy to work with transcontextual description because it keeps you from getting locked into one plane of description, which is, I think, very dangerous because then when there's an attempt to address an issue in any kind of complex system, like a Nora or an ecology, there is this idea, a very mechanistic old idea, that you can fix things like you would fix a truck. This is not a truck. We are not fixing a truck. The thinking that is needing to be used here is much more like the thinking around, composing a piece of music. Okay, or creating a dance performance or writing a play. Okay, it's the type of thinking that holds multiple forms of relational process simultaneously. And it doesn't immediately come naturally to people to do that because there's been this deep, dark indoctrination of what it is to be strategic, what it is to be on topic, what it is to be relevant, what it is to be credible, what it is to be authorized, what it is to make sense. And in this moment when there's so much anxiety around climate, and the dangers are increasing. The capacity for complexity is shrinking. Mm-hmm. And strangely, at the same time, people are talking more and more about complexity. My frustration is that so often when there is a discussion of complexity, it's as though that complexity were over there and it were something to be mastered or managed or controlled, or if we just understood it well enough, we could hack it, crack the code. And when I point that lens at myself and I think about what would it feel like to have someone trying to hack me or crack my code or manage me or control me, there's a feeling that wells up. And I cannot imagine that is really the best approach to looking at questions around culture change, systems change, the depth of systems change that we're needing to look at right now is so often superficialized by a kind of flat and mechanistic version of systems thinking. Okay, there it is. That's my complaint. I can't deal with it. I'm so frustrated by the idea that we could rearrange the culture somehow, or we could just generate some policy, or worse, that we could change people's mindsets. What does that mean? What does that even mean? To think we can change people's mindsets or raise their consciousness.
I'm so glad you're bringing
suspicious.
this up.
Yeah.
This has been a subject that we've been thinking about and talking about so much in the last few weeks, because we're hosting a lot of meetups, we're doing a lot of calls lately, and the conversation inevitably goes to, okay, what's the action item at the end of this discussion?
What's my homework?
Yeah, what can I go home and do with this? And so often people are trying to oversimplify and get something down to this kind of binary level of complexity where it's one or the other, and we can just, have that, 5-step action list and go execute. And we've really been asking ourselves, what is it that causes people to desire to have it one way or the other instead of just sitting with the discomfort of not knowing and just
trying to observe,
opening your eyes and observing and taking action as it kind of, I hesitate to say feels right, but
as it emerges, maybe.
Yeah, I don't really know what the next step of that would be, but I'm more curious at the moment of what is it that causes us to want to simplify it so deeply beyond the appropriate level of complexity.
Okay, so in one of my slides that I use in this course that I teach, I have this course that I teach on certifying warm data lab hosts, and it's my favorite thing in the world is to do this course. And the reason it's my favorite thing is because it dives deep into the theoretical aspect of what this question you just asked, which I think is a very important question. And it also works with the practical aspects of that. And the practical bit is the thing I always get accused of ignoring. And, that Nora, she makes lots of sense. And I love how she talks about stuff, but I don't quite know what to do with it, and yet that's okay with me. Remember, one of the things that I think is really important is to help to contribute to the conditions that generate a meta sense-making process. And don't mess with what happens inside it. Right? So a contribution into that would look like a question. It would look like a sensitivity. It would look like an aesthetic, a feeling, a tone around which there is room and acceptability and even logic in allowing people their complexity. And right now that's not really there. So I think this itch to get control of it, make it flat, put it into a strategic planner has everything to do with distancing from the juicy stuff. Right? So if the ecological crisis is something that exists in graphs and in numbers and in, tons of carbon, that doesn't touch the place where I make decisions based on my understanding of success, of wantability, of relevance to my family, my culture, other people. The irony, for example, of needing to go pick up quickly a new suit jacket at Zara because I have to go make a speech and I spilled something on my jacket in the plane, right? So I'm going to go give a talk. I have to jump into the nearest store to buy something to wear to be on that stage. And that thing that I bought to wear is completely dripping in slavery and exploitation. Right? What is that? Why is it that there are these schisms in the way that there are the deeper sense-making processes of who is this woman on stage? What is she wearing? How is she presenting? What's on the screen behind her? How is the tech working? What does the brochure look like? What is the, outreach and the branding of this event look like? Like all those questions, all of them are rooted in a culture that is actually driving the exploitation and extraction. So this is what I'm so frustrated with this superficiality around it.
Yeah.
So one of the slides in this course that I teach is a slide that is entitled Perception in Context. And it's a very creepy slide. At first, you don't really see much, but I'll send it to you so you can show it on your thing. But it has a picture of a stick bug, and the stick bug is in the tree. And it has a picture of a snow fox, and the snow fox is in a tundra. And you can hardly see the stick bug, and you can hardly see the snow fox. And it has a picture of a leaf gecko in the leaves, and you can hardly see that. And the question that I like to bring up around that is the question of what are we talking about with systems change when everything we perceive is within the context that we are camouflaging into, okay? Imagine you are a stick bug and the culture that we are in is a tree, okay? What are we talking about when we're talking about systems change? This is a deep process. It isn't really about shifting around some policy. So I moved to Sweden to be with this man that I met a very long time ago, this fantastic love story. We met in 1988. We were 20 years old. We were on a beach in Thailand, and we had this terrific summer love affair. And then he went back to Sweden and I went back to San Francisco, and 25 years went by. We lost each other entirely. And then I went back to Sweden after I had had a divorce, and he had just had a divorce. And we were old people by then. We were in our mid 40s, and we fell madly back in love. Okay. So this is important because when I came here, I entered into another culture. And, you would think that Swedish culture still pretty much Western civ, right? Still got Nikes, still got
Starbucks,
Apple computers, and it's like basically the same. People want to drive Audis, and they want to wear fancy clothes, and they want to live the posh life. And then I learned it was actually nothing like that. And there were all these moments when I hit these cultural walls. And so it's a strange feeling because when you hit those things, it's disorienting because you can't actually see that you've hit them. So it always happens at Christmas. And I don't even like Christmas. My dad was the most bah humbug Christmas person you ever met. And so Christmas is not something that I'm, a big doter over. But still, in Sweden, Christmas is on the 24th, not the 25th. And so when you have Santa Claus coming, what happens? Is he coming on the 23rd? Like, that can't be right. And then maybe we could just have him come the 24th, but then you get your stuff on the 25th, and by then the whole thing's over. So that's definitely not going to work. But here, Santa comes to the door, brings the presents in, basically sits down, has a beer with the family, hands out some treats, and then goes. And while that's happening, everybody's hanging out, and then there's this TV show. And we don't have any of that in the middle of the day, because in the middle of the day in my world, everyone's cooking, because there's going to be this huge meal. And here, the huge meal is no biggie because it's basically all done. And it's cold fish and cold ham. You just have to boil a couple potatoes and heat up the potato stuff with the anchovies in it, and you're good to go. And everything else is, ready to go. And so I can't deal with that. I mean, I don't want any cold fish on Christmas.
What about the turkey? Turkey.
So last Christmas, there's always something in our household around Christmas because these things creep up on you. And so I'm in the kitchen and I'm making mashed potatoes, and my husband comes in. He says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm making mashed potatoes. It's Christmas." And he was like, "No, we don't have mashed potatoes at Christmas. You can't have mashed potatoes at Christmas. They should be boiled potatoes at Christmas." And I'm like, "No, we have to have mashed potatoes." Like, I don't even care, right? So, but the point is this is that this is the depth of these expectations and traditions and the way in which the sense has been made across generations of how it is we live in our world and what's relevant. And we think it's just dinner, but it's not just dinner. There's so much in there that even I'm aware of it. I'm studying it. It still happens to me. And I'm still saying to him, but we ended up having both kinds of potatoes. So I think that's significant in this question around climate change, because I think the kind of changes that need to get made are down there. They're down there at the level of the stick bug. They're down there at the level of the Christmas potatoes. They're deep down in the notion of what it is to stand in front of a group of people and what you're wearing and where those clothes came from. And so, in the quest here is to recognize that there's no 1, 2, 3. None of this is on the surface. And the phrase that just is so resonant for me right now is that it's not just that and nothing more. Whatever it is, whether it's the jacket you have to get or the mashed potatoes or the way that you give directions to someone or the idea of what it is to be successful, none of it is just that and nothing more. It's all got multiple contextual processes underneath it that are guiding and moving in ways that are much richer than right now are possibly even remotely diagrammable. So I'm really interested into diving into that richness. I want to go in there and be in there with my own complexity on board. Okay, so my feeling is that we can't address complexity without using our own complexity. So very often the notion of how to deal with a complex problem in a complex system becomes an intellectual issue. And I am definitely an intellectual person, but there's a lot more than that going on. And my intellect is not separatable from those other aspects of my complexity. So what it is that I can perceive, it's Christmas. I need to make mashed potatoes. I perceive that. This is my action. That's what I can perceive in that moment. What is the conditional landscape in which those notions have become what is perceivable? And that's where the real work is. And, I know I'm making it sound like it's really difficult and it's really out of reach, but actually we all do it all day, every day. And so for me, I just think that it's really one of the things that it's really important to go there and just not be afraid of it. But it smells different. It feels different. It looks different. It takes a lot of courage to address an acute life-endangering problem with that kind of discourse and that kind of approach, because it doesn't look on point. It doesn't look relevant. It doesn't appear to have an obvious solution. You can't start with a goal. Okay. If you start with a goal with a complex problem, guess what you did? You linearized it.
Yeah.
That's what you did. And the second you linearized it, you blinded yourself to all that contextual process coming from the peripheries and the conditions. And then you won't perceive it. You won't see it. So you won't respond to it. And then around we go. So that's what I'm seeing, is that you have these notions like, we need to get big banks to divest from, petroleum. Okay. Well, let's think about that. What does that mean? What are the conditions in which the investment that big banks make is the right thing for their context and other people's contexts? If we want to get big banks to divest from petroleum, can we first go to all the people who will be affected by that divestment and help them to be able to be clear of that backlash? And if we start there, there's a whole lot of things that will change on the way. But it's a question of actually not going directly at the problem. The problem is climate change. We must address the climate change. Yes, we have to address the climate change, clearly, or we're all going to die. I get that. But having been around this for a very long time, directly addressing climate change does not necessarily lead to culture change. And so how can we hold the culture, move those conditions around so that there is the possibility that it will actually, in the meta, make sense to do things differently, so that dealing with climate change becomes a consequence instead of the direct action point. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So anyway, that's where I'm frustrated, because I just feel so often like there's such an eagerness, a beautiful, well-intended eagerness that is based on our very survival, but that eagerness is laser beamed into singular contextual processes. And, all I can say is, I don't know if there's a nice way to say it, but I think we're kind of screwed if we win, and we're screwed if we lose. If we don't make those changes and there's no shift in climate policy, we're hooped. But if we do make those changes and we don't make them with care for the humanity and the culture and the depth of that stick bug question, we're going to end up in a full tilt culture war. With the climate activists as the enemy of the people.
Yeah.
So, and we've already seen that. So,
Yeah.
Or some sort of a terrible totalitarian system, which a lot of the time when people get into that panic mode, they are looking for some sort of a big daddy figure to come in and restore the order. And it's a very archetypal pattern. And that's no better if we just install some sort of a totalitarian order that says, okay, we're going to be super militant on climate change, but that means that all of these and these and these and these groups are going to be oppressed.
Yeah. And it's tricky, right? So right now, for example, there's a big push to stop eating meat for the sake of climate, to stop riding on airplanes, to stop using plastic, to do all of these things. And, I think it's just really important to recognize that even though those are good things to do, there are people for whom it's their life, it does not allow for that. And to then judge them as somehow being anti-climate is not helpful.
Yeah.
So, we have to be very careful that we don't create a situation where in order to be the perfect climate advocate, you have to behave in just only particular ways. So, yeah.
Yeah. It seems that it goes down. It's not just a systemic change that we're looking for or cultural change, but it's also individual. But that individual change can't be forced because then we're taking away people's sovereignty. So it's like, what is the generator function? It's really difficult to find it because everything affects everything, right? So we've been looking a lot at personal transformation, but not from the perspective of like people have to change or we have to change minds or raise consciousness or anything like that. It's more like there's environmental pressure already happening and this transformation is happening in a lot of people. So how can we support that? It's like something is already emerging. How can we bring that into life in a healthy way?
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, that means asking another order of question. It means, so instead of like, okay, here's one question that I work with quite a bit that I think is a good example. If we ask the question, which is a question that is pivotal to all mammalian continued life, is the possibility of that species being able to inhabit a realm where the babies can be fed. Okay? Feed the babies. Let's just start with that. How do we feed the babies? If we want continuation of our species, how do we feed the babies? Okay, so then if you think about the 17 SDGs, don't get me started, and which are not 17 separate issues. Really, they need to be, it's one issue. And if you ask in that frame of how do we feed the babies, you'll see it. So in that question, there is the question of addressing the soil. The soil has to be able to grow the food. The water has to be clean. The people who are working with the soil and the farms have to be able to feed their babies. Okay? The relationship between the genders has to be a respectful relationship because to feed the babies is the ultimate act of mutual kindness. Right? It requires that there be air to breathe. It requires that there be the possibility for economic and political and cultural addressing of that one question: how do we feed the babies? And it's nutritional. It's about health. It's about love. It's about the local. It's about the global. There it is. The whole thing is right there. But if you go chasing after it in all those different directions, you get a lot of linear projects. And in the meantime, the people who can't feed their babies are frustrated. And I really sympathize with some of the stuff that Greta Thunberg is saying right now. And I sympathize particularly from the position of being a mom. And I just want to kind of speak to this a little bit because there's a lot of people talking about her right now. And I want to just say that from a parent's position, this is a hard moment to know what to do, how to be there for your kids. And so between my husband and I, we have 6 kids, and they range from 25 to 13. And there's so much pain and fear. And, I have my kids saying, I need some life goals. I'm depressed because I need some life goals. And I don't know what life goals to have right now. Do I try to be successful in the existing system? Or do I, get out of the system? Do I go to school and get an education to better prepare me to be in the, like, what do I do? Who am I supposed to be? What am I aiming for? Am I going to live a life where I have a house and kids and, a car and a job and a pension plan? I doubt it. And then, my daughter, she's so incredible. And she says to me on the phone the other night, Mom, I just don't get it. How do you be a good person in this moment? I want to be a good person. I want to know that I'm a good person. I'm willing to do everything I can to be a good person, to wake up every day and try harder to be a good person. But every single thing that I buy or touch or do is connected to this vast interdependent process of extraction and exploitation. And how can anyone think of themselves as being a good person in this time?
Yeah.
And so what as a mom, what should I say to that? How do I be with that? How do I hold that? I mean, the only thing I really know to do right now is to say, that's the right question. It's a really good question. And just by asking it, you are, in fact, a slightly better person than you would be if you weren't asking it. But I have no answers. This is, to be a parent right now is to be in a generation where those deeply scripted relationships across generations are fluid. They are just turning to liquid. And how to hold those in a way that is not bullshit. Because there will be none of that. There's no turning to these kids and saying, oh, honey, it's all going to be okay. Just, do the best you can. And I know you have it in you, and follow your heart, and it's all going to be good. And I mean, I would not dare say that to my kids. If I did that, I would lose my credibility in 1 second. And so the only thing I really know to do is say, I don't know, but I'm here with you. I'm asking the same question, and we're going to learn together, and we're going to make mistakes, but we're going to learn together. And that's a very different kind of mutual learning. It's a very different kind of relationship between generations. And just to tie that back, it's also part of that question of how do you feed the babies? Right? And it's also in the question of what meta are you creating? What meta are we contributing to? And when I say to my kids, I'm here with you, there's a whole different possibility of interaction than if I were to show up with some canned answer that I learned from some talk show or meme or some nonsense. But the willingness to be in the raw lostness with them is it's not just that and nothing more. It's a whole shift in what's possible in that relationship. And it's creative, it's hard, it's, messy, it's unknown, it doesn't have an action plan, it's totally indirect, but it shifts the aesthetic of our way of being.
I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
I'll go really quick one. I wanted to ask you about urgency in this context. I mean, feeding the babies, if they're not being fed, the urgency is obviously quite high. When people look at climate change, it's the same thing. It's like a lot of people feel we don't have a lot of time, so we need to take action right away. But then, it limits our ability to make sense of the broader complexity of the situation. So, I mean, what do you do about that question? Because in a lot of contexts, when we're discussing these subjects, and one's ability to listen and absorb and sit
with the discomfort.
Sit with the discomfort is really put on a backseat when there's a sense of urgency that they don't know how to properly respond to. And it just, we need action now, and I can't listen to you anymore. We need to do something.
Yeah, but that there is a doing something. I'm not saying do nothing. I'm just saying be really careful about the things you choose to do, because if they only address one context, then the cost, the damage, gets pushed under another context. And so often that has just become sort of normalized as, oh, well, that's how life is. And, or we're just in a time of transformation and it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
And it's, okay. So if we're in a time of transformation and it's going to hurt, then let's do everything we can to hold the populations who are going to be hurt. Let's don't just dangle them out there. And I'm saying them because, frankly, for the most part, even though, my own family has been hit by some stuff in this confusing era, I live a life that is not necessarily, I have a warm bed. I have food. I have access to health. So, but there are a good portion of the world who don't. And, or for whom those things are tentative. And so, in owning that privilege that I have, I think the best possible thing is to, address the urgency, but don't address it as though it were a mechanistic process and that you can hide the cost of things under other contexts. But unless you start looking at things across multiple contexts, you will, because you simply won't see it.
Yeah.
Right. So, in the interest of trying to create more standardized and higher level education, there's been standardized testing has been implemented, for example. Okay. So this was an attempt to change the education system and to get control. And one of the things that happened was that in doing that, teachers weren't able to really respond to their students in the same way because they were strapped to a particular curriculum with particular levels. And so the kids who were moving ahead or behind or in strange sideways directions started suffering. And then the next thing you know, we're looking at all kinds of depression in very young kids, anxiety. We're looking at numbers of kids in schools that are on pharmaceutical drugs just skyrocketing, right? Not to mention the way overdiagnosis of ADHD and those drugs and how those drugs have contributed to the other, benzodiazepines and the opiate use later on, and that whole culture. So, if there's not attention to multiple contextual process, which may seem diffracted and diffused in the moment, you pay. So in the interest of time, actually, because it's so urgent and we don't have time, we haven't got time to isolate each of these problems and attach to them as though they were separate. We don't have time to deal with that because in the consequences of that are just these oceans of consequences that are insurmountable. So, I mean, really, if you look at everything we have to deal with right now, all those things were once solutions. So it's I guess that's what I would say is that, either you deal with the complexity before or you're going to deal with it after. And right now, for example, the education system is not really responsible or accountable or in any way even linked to high levels of depression in universities, or to, people who grew up thinking that they were inadequate in their education. And so they suffer in alcoholism or addictive lifestyles or in violence or in poverty or in, and there's no link back to how the education system may have not met them. It's just that person was not successful at dealing with our culture. And so now there you have it. I don't know. I think you get the point. Mm-hmm. The education system is not just the education system. Yeah. That's my point. It's inside the other systems. And likewise, the health system is not just the health system. It's also the education system and the political system, the economic system, the agriculture, the banking systems, right? It's all there. And if you try to just create better health system and pretend that those other things aren't there, then you don't actually get the movement that you're looking for, even if it appears that you're getting incremental change. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
It's actually pretty amazing how I've got my list of questions off to the side here, and you've gone through everything kind of naturally on your own. I haven't had to say anything, so doing our job for us.
Yeah. Although I know it's a difficult question that's probably unanswerable, but a lot of people feel like, what can I do? What can I do now? Obviously I'm a being that feels some sense of agency and responsibility for what's happening in the world.
Yeah. Well, I think that the best thing that we can do actually is, first of all, start to explore that notion of your own self as complex. And then pretty soon you come to this question of, where is the edge of me? And in that question, there is an opening. Okay, where is the edge of me? Do I end at the edge of my skin? Am I the edge of my bank account or my tax ID number? Am I the edge of my family? Am I the edge of my community, my nation? Am I the edge of the biosphere? Where's the edge of me? And in that question and that exploration, there's a very active shift in the possibilities of what you can do. Because otherwise you end up in a nasty little paradox around, if I do something good for me, it's going to be bad for you. If I do something good for my nation, it's going to be bad for your nation. If I do something good for my family, it might not be good for a family over there. And that recognition of that interdependence that we are all in fact in is a shift. And there's just another order of questions and possibilities that come out of that shift. So that's what I'm interested in, is the unprecedented possibilities that come out of recognition and familiarity with that super rich zone where the mashed potatoes are, and the Christmas questions and the strange cultural lostness. There's a richness there that is a transcontextual liminal space. And in there's a whole different possibility realm. And in those possibilities, the way that we show up, we attach to and are addressing multiple things simultaneously. And so I call that, no, I won't tell you, that's from my book, so you can't have that yet. But there's a way in which we can ask questions that are going to be operative action points that move at much wider possible consequences. We're looking for consequences. How do we create the conditions in which the consequences are higher levels of health in the interdependencies we rely upon?
Right, and at a fractal level as well, not just for each individual, but also for families, for societies, for the biosphere. Yeah. With that, actually, I wanted to ask you about your understanding of sense making, how you define it, because a lot of the time, sense making is a term that's starting to get thrown around quite a lot, and a lot of the time, when people frame it, is this intellectual exercise of like, how do you frame things? But it goes much deeper. So, can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, okay. Let's start with something juicy. Let's start with the question of what makes you sexually attracted to someone. Where is that? Is that chemical? Is it in your body? Is it hormonal? Is it because of the media and what you've perceived and been kind of programmed to think is attractive? Is it because of the various relationships in your family and the things you're familiar with? Is it something you smell? Is it the conversation? Is it intellectual? Is it political? Does it have to do with financial questions, or is it having to do with this sense of identity? Is it because you feel like you're the strong one when you're with somebody and they make you feel dominant, or is it because you feel submissive and vulnerable and cared for? Is it because you need to feed your children? You need to pay rent? You need to live? Is it because it was never your choice? Somebody else made that choice? Where does that come from? So when I think about sense making, I think that it's a good idea to go there, because it's at these places where we can't actually sort out what it is that's informing desire. And, honestly, if it's not there, you can't make it there. And if it is there, it's hard to pretend it's not there, right? Desire is it's intellectual. Yes, it's economic. Yes, it's emotional. Yes, it's physical. Yes, it's political. It's in the media. It's like, so where is that? And so sense making, I think, is down in that deeper, what I would call warm data place. And it's very difficult to get firm outlines on that. But what it isn't difficult to do is to bring things into the conditions in which sense is being made. And remember, sense, we have senses, right? You see, you hear, you touch, you taste, you smell, and then all of those inform each other, right? You can get into the sort of beautiful, beautiful realm of synesthesia, which I think is extra important for us to be playing with right now, of how we make sense across senses. Because if our senses are delivering information that's landing in an existing epistemological and cultural frame, it only serves to affirm and confirm what we already perceived, right? And so there's a danger there that the sense that gets made is based upon the sense that's been made. And so it continues to be the sense based upon the sense. Are you with me?
Yeah.
So how do we then, start to shift things at that very deep level and make a space for new senses to be made so that new ideas, new possibilities, new impulses, new metas can come out of that? And for me, that has to do with, one thing it has to do with is by no means telling people what to think. Okay, no, that's right out. It has nothing to do with drawing maps of complex systems on whiteboards. It has everything to do with going deep down into the stories of our lives, the notions that we carry of our culture, the processes in which we have expectations that get somehow mixed with other people's expectations and surprised, right? That moment of surprise with the mashed potatoes, those are the moments when new senses get made. That's the place. And so how can we begin to find the cracks and the fissures in our matrix so that we can start to see it, start to feel it, start to recognize, oh, this is the glass box I'm in, right? But until you can begin to get at those cracks, you just keep carrying on and you keep making sense from the sense you made before. And that's just what it is.
I wanted to ask you what you feel the role of debate is in sense making, because I've been seeing a lot of breakdown in our ability to debate, and there's a lot of kind of degradation into identity and narrative. And I don't know how familiar you are with this postmodernist movement, but it's quite interesting how it kind of pulls the rug out from rationality, and it seems like what you're saying, it's like, step away from the whiteboard. Let's be more about the experiential interrelation, and kind of recognizing those little moments of differences between each other. So when it comes to debate, how can we do it better, I guess is my question.
I think that one of the things that we have to be really careful with right now is creating really polarized and binary discussions. And so if the question is a question that's there just to stir up contradictory viewpoints, I'm not sure that that's a really very productive approach. I'm much more interested in what happens when we bring several contexts into a question. And we look at that question, whatever it is, identity, sexuality, from multiple contextual frames. And allow personal story mixed with professional expertise, mixed with curiosity, humor, art. Okay, let those things come into our communication process as we explore across many contexts. And when that happens, what I see, because this is sort of the process that is the Warm Data Lab, is that there is a different integrity that emerges. It's a very different integrity. It isn't an integrity of who's right and who's wrong, or what's the right thing to do. It's an integrity around how to question my own positioning inside this complexity and be ready with a kind of stance instead of taking a stand. Okay, so much of what I see in debate has to do with taking a stand or, locking down various points one after another. And what I'm much more interested in is the possibility of mutual learning across multiple contextual processes in the integrity of knowing that we don't know what we're doing. There are no experts right now. And that's a position that is changes the tone. I don't know what we're doing. I don't know where to go with this. You can call it anything you want. Is it meta-modern? Is it postmodern? Is it deconstructionist? What is it? I don't know. Whatever. So how to hold those conversations in ways that allow for new sense to be made. Okay, that's the issue. Not how to figure out who was right or wrong or who won the debate, but what new thing came out of this? What did we learn? What did the participants in the debate learn? I don't know. That's my feeling. Because otherwise it just gets so snarky. Ugh.
Yeah.
Gosh.
This brings up such an interesting thought to me. Something, you might have to bear with me here as I work through this because this is the first time I ever tried to describe it. But In the last couple of days, we've been having this discussion about the pendulum swing of culture. And so we were discussing like, what is the pendulum representing? And I couldn't help but notice through that conversation how we were attempting to take this grander concept of like, which way is culture going in humanity, and fit it into this two-dimensional plane of left and right, the polars. And I can't help but notice that it's just part of our cultural sense-making models to use flat surfaces to represent three-dimensional concepts. And that maybe, we've talked about like how to symbolically represent ideas and how to make decisions and how to take into context all of the different angles or vectors that you could look at a problem, all the different perspectives that you could look at it. But people's desire to make sense and have it a certain way and have those action items attempts to fit those, what I would call three-dimensional problems, onto a two-dimensional plane. What's left, what's right, my position over here, your position over here. And so fitting rationality and logic and these kind of like cherished concepts in I suppose you could say masculine thinking is like, I wonder if it still works just by just changing the plane that we're discussing and planning these things out on. Like, broaden, start viewing things in more of a three-dimensional plane. Does that make sense?
I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've been having a little one-woman crusade against for some years now. And I think the process of diagramming or mapping is fine. Just throw away the diagram and the map. The process might be helpful to people to play with it.
Right.
But just, in the words of Korzybski, don't mistake the map for the territory.
Yeah.
And I'm much more interested in the territory. And so my process around that has to do with this, this exploration of warm data, of transcontextual information. And I love that. It makes me so happy and it's so rich and I love working with people on it. So I'm completely over the diagramming. I'm done. I'm totally, completely done.
Yeah.
So I'm happily graduated, I feel, from that process. But I have to also recognize that for a lot of people, it's it's the side of the swimming pool. You have to hold on, otherwise you might sink. And so I'm trying to get this other process kind of out in the world because it's so useful, and because generating flatness around the analysis of a situation is the perfect way to generate a fantastic answer to the wrong question.
Yeah.
And so I'm really concerned that we don't have time for that, right? It's back to that time question. Like there's just no more time to pretend that the world is flat. It's not, we're not fixing a truck. This is culture and it's unpredictable and it's alive. So we have to show up with unpredictable aliveness to meet it. So one of the chapters in my new book is called The Shape of the Response Has to Meet the Shape of the Trouble. And right now, the shape of the response most of the time does not meet the shape of the trouble. And by meet, I don't mean match. I mean meet. So what is the shape of the trouble? Well, the shape of the trouble is this deep, swirly, rich alchemy of, gaseous fluid possibilities, right? So what's the shape of the response?
Also swirling and alive and
something that, right. And so how are you going to put that on paper? How are you going to, deliver that to a grant foundation? How are you going to, justify it against the board members, regulations for deliverables? And all I can say is whatever. We just have to do it anyway. There's just no more time. We just have to do it anyway.
It brings to mind, we've had a lot of discussions with and about Daniel Schmachtenberger lately. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah.
And my initial impression of him several years ago when I first heard of him was that he was this brilliant thinker attempting to map out reality and map out all these complex systems. And I suppose anytime I've heard of someone who thinks about complex systems, that's been the implication, that you've got some three-dimensional map buried somewhere in your basement that that you're just getting ready to share with the world, and then suddenly we'll know how to deal with all these problems.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's interesting how much more that the value of that systems thinking, whatever you want to call it, is about experiential knowing and about stepping back and just observing what is, and not so much about mapping like we're all assuming.
Well, I agree with that completely. And there's this need to be able to have some balance between the poetry and the prose. So what's happening in the poetry, it better be 50% of what you're doing. But then you also have to have the prose. And that, that level of conscious verbal description that's based in some kind of explanatory process between you and me. And where the poetry might give us an expression or an impression, there's also a need for that explanation. And so bringing those things together, I think, is part of what I would refer to, again, in that transcontextual question around having many textures of information, so that you can explore not just the multitude of textures, but the relationship between them. Right? So that's the leap. It's not just about the multiple perspectives or the multiple stake makers or, any of that multiplicity can get really isolated in a kind of representational, kind of totemism issue. But what's interesting is what's in the relationship between them. So in that sort of exploration of complexity, there has not been the room really yet in Western Civ to explore that poetry. That's not true for other cultures. So, let's just don't be thinking that this is what is, because this is not what is. This is one small version of what is. And the questions that we're asking here today, like there's something new, are not new. In my life, they go back 50 years. In my father's life, they go back, and his father was asking questions at the same level 125 years ago. That's just my family. Then there's the entire indigenous world that's been working with these questions for thousands of years. So,
yeah, like if we look at shamanism, one of the oldest kind of inquiries into the nature of reality, it's always been about all these different ways of knowing, and a lot of them are completely not rational and not logical, and you can't even put them into words. And I really like looking at that, because it's something we've already done as a humanity, and we can bring that form of exploration back in a way to realize that there's value in different ways of knowing, not just in the linear, the logical, the verbal, conscious.
I mean, again, I'd have no idea how we get to new sense making by using our conscious, rational sense making processes. I don't know. I don't think it's possible, because I think you just end up right where you started.
Yeah.
And so I'm seriously concerned that if that's the only tonality we've got, if that's the only song we're playing, we're going to end up with a really boring dance. No, and it's just going to drive us back in. It's a matrix. I mean, those guys got it right. The Matrix filmmakers it was brilliant. We're in the Matrix. So how do we recognize that we're creating those conditions that then, like my friend Lance Strait says, we create the conditions that in turn condition us. Mm-hmm. And okay, so there you go. So how do we create different conditions? We have to make new sense. And where do those new sense come from? They have to come from new senses, new sense making. So that's in the deep down, and it's not difficult. It's just not authorized. It's just
not authorized or not obvious sometimes.
It's not obvious based on the set of sense makings that we're in.
It's like that idea, if you tell somebody to think outside of the box, it doesn't actually help them to think outside of the box if they don't know how.
Yeah, I thought it was so great when, it became this kind of mandate in schools to teach critical thinking. It's like, you don't see any paradox in that?
Memorize critical thinking. All right, and
go.
go.
Yeah, and this is how you do critical thinking. And when one kid says, no, you don't, then you failed them.
That's funny.
Okay, we're going to stop here and continue our discussion with Nora Bateson in the next episode. To get all the links and show notes for this conversation, go to futurethinkers.org/106.
We're now doing weekly watch party discussion every Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific or 5 p.m. UK time at futurethinkers.org/watch. Next week, we're watching and discussing John Vervaeke's Meaning Crisis series, episode 3. Join us at futurethinkers.org/watch. See you next week.
Get our 50-page guide on adapting to the future. Sign up at futurethinkers.org/sign-up.
Upgrade your mental operating system, increase your personal sovereignty, and gain deeper self-knowledge with our courses in personal evolution. Register now at courses.futurethinkers.org. To stay up to date with new episodes, subscribe to Future Thinkers on your favorite platform. And leave us a review or a like. It really helps out the show. And don't forget to share this episode on social media.